Okay, well, welcome everyone to this exciting environment campaign event. We're now in the third and final week of events, and today we're joined by the lovely Julia from the environmental charity Hope for the Future. Julia's going to be talking through some of the ways that we can engage with local politics and inspire others to take action against the climate crisis. So without further ado, if that's all right, I'll pass it over to you, Julia, to kind of start us off.
Yeah, Brill. Thanks so much, Amy, and thanks for inviting me here today. Yeah, really excited to be talking about this. My first slide says here, pathways to effective MP engagement. And if that's something you're interested in, that's obviously something I'd really encourage, and I'll talk quite a lot about today. But I also kind of like to flag at this point, and when I say what I hope you'll get out of the next hour is just more generally about communicating, especially about climate change, effectively with lots of different people in your life and using techniques to try and understand the other people that you're talking to. And it doesn't just have to be an MP or a councillor or a local politician. So yeah, I guess what you would call transferable skills, I hope. And yeah, a tiny bit about me, so you know who I am before we get started. My name is Julia, but lots of people call me Jules. My pronouns are she, her. I've been working at Hope for the Future for about 2.5 years now. I started out while I was still a student, and yeah, now I do a bit more kind of oversight stuff, but I still love delivering this training. I really believe in what we do. I've gone from kind of like student campaigning myself into this stuff, and I love getting to do it every day, and I hope you'll see why over the next hour. Hope for the Future is a charity that is based in Sheffield, but we work nationally across the UK, and it's all about, as I mentioned, having effective conversations with MPs about climate change, because we know that across the country, more people are starting to care about climate change and think that it's really important for us to act on it. But they might not always know what to ask of their MPs, or like how we get the next steps in policy. And that can feel really daunting and scary, but I'm here to tell you that hopefully it's not, and that you really can make a difference by engaging with people in positions of power about this issue. So today's session, I am in a little bit going to talk very briefly about Parliament, but don't let that put you off. It's not going to be, super duper nerdy or like too much technical information. Mostly what I'm here to talk to you about today is communicating with empathy and trying to understand the person that you're talking to and how you can use that knowledge to build a really effective relationship, which will get you the action that you want to see. And we have this relationship-based approach, which is we like to call tried and tested. We've been doing this for 7 or 8 years now. And yeah, we find it worked really, really well with politicians at every level and across the spectrum. But we also think that it works with, for example, it might be within the college people you want to influence, or when you get to university people you want to influence, anyone in positions of influence, how you can get them to take action. So yes, communicating with empathy. What do I mean by that? Not sure if you've ever come across this before. It's a movement and a way of communicating called Nonviolent Communication, often referred to as NVC. And it was kind of founded or popularized by somebody called Marshall Rosenberg. And it's all about this idea of trying to connect to a core humanity and to communicate really effectively with someone, even if you really disagree with them and you don't think you have a lot in common, finding those things that do connect you, even under trying conditions, as it says here. And I want today to be really practical, so I want to tell you, like, what does that look like in action? And so it means moving away from things which are really moralistic, like so-and-so is a bad person, so-and-so will never need to take the actions that they need to saying so-and-so hasn't acted on this way in the past, so-and-so isn't doing the things that we need them to do, but not saying that they never will, because actually, thinking of our MPs, we're probably not going to have an election for another few years. And although at election time you might want to work really hard to get somebody out of office, in the meantime, they are your MP and you want to do everything you can to get them to take action and not to just dismiss them. And I really like this quote at the bottom here. People who seem like monsters are simply human beings whose language and behaviour keeps us from seeing their humanness. And if we want them to take action, it's often by trying to connect with that humanness, even if it doesn't feel really apparent to you at that time, or even if they've done things that really hurt and upset you, seeing what they can do and using that as a strength and using that to make progress. So yeah, again, trying to put this into practice, for example, you might want to say something like, when I see that you voted against a pay rise for NHS staff, that makes me feel sad and confused because I have family members who work for the NHS. Would you explain why you voted in that way? So that's a way that we would use this kind of communication where we try to understand somebody and build from it rather than shut down conversations. The whole the rest of this hour is going to be about me kind of filling that out and how we use it in more detail. But I just wanted to start in this place so you get a sense of where I'm going, and yeah, the sort of thing that we're working towards. I promised I was going to talk about Parliament, but I promised it's only really, really brief. Just in case there's anybody who's watching this who thinks you're talking about MPs, but I don't even know what an MP is. There are 650 MPs in the UK, and they represent 650 different constituencies. So you will have one MP who represents you in Parliament, in Westminster, and you can see on the right-hand side of this map, it looks a bit funny because they're all made to be equal sizes, but this is the layout of MPs. The blue ones are Conservative MPs, and they are the current governing party of the UK Parliament, and the red dots are Labour MPs, who are the current opposition. If you live in Leeds, you are most likely to be represented by a Labour MP, and I'll give you some examples of where to find out exactly who your MP is a little bit later on. So you might be watching this and you might know loads about MPs, or you might not know very much. For lots of reasons, MPs often don't get very good press, and they can often, like, you know, maybe disappoint us in what they're doing. Their values might not match up with ours. Even though it feels difficult, something that I'm gonna kind of ask you to do here today is put yourself in the shoes of your MP, or indeed of your councillor, or anybody that it is you're trying to lobby. And yeah, to try and understand what their life might be like, what their job is like, and then use that information in your relationship building and in your conversation. So I'm going to show you a slide in a second about what a hard job it is potentially to be an MP. Things to remember that they have to legislate on every possible issue that's out there. So not only climate change, but health, transport, schools, you know, absolutely everything needs legislation. And so that's why they might not be experts on the issue that you want to talk to them about. For example, climate change is a global issue, and that can be really hard to work out how I, as an MP for Leeds Central, I'm going to tackle that issue. I think I won't go into the other ones too much because, you know, I want to get on with it. This is just a you know, imagine this is your Google Calendar and you're an MP, and this is what a week in the life of an MP looks like. This is from a researcher called Dr. Nikki Sue, who's absolutely brilliant, and yeah, I'll send you the link afterwards if you're interested. This is a real life MP's diary, so this isn't like fictionalized, this is anonymized, but it is an actual week in the life of an MP. The blue things are Westminster activities and events that they have to go to. So for example, you can see PMQs at the middle there on a Wednesday lunchtime. You might have heard of that. That's when we ask questions of the Prime Minister. So those are all things that they have to be in Westminster for. You can see that this MP travels 5 hours, up to 250 miles to and from Parliament. So they have to build in that time too. The green are constituency things, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that means and how you can interact with your MP within your constituencies. But for example, they might be answering emails even during the Westminster week for constituents in their constituency. A surgery is a very weird name for just the time that MPs give to meeting their constituents locally. And things like village fete, town hall talk. It's only the things in pink which is their free time. And, you know, you can see how little that is compared to the rest of the week. So even though yeah, MPs, like, and don't get me wrong, you might know that MPs earn a fair amount of money, even though they do things to disappoint us. It's worth us bearing in mind that they're busy and their lives are difficult. And so how do we incorporate that into our work with them? So bearing all of that in mind, sometimes we show a video at this point. I'm not going to right now because I'm conscious of time. I wanted to talk through some of the defensive behaviours we see when we sit in MP meetings. And at Hope for Future, that is one of the main things that we do, is we will go with people to meet their MP and like sit in the room. And we've been doing it for 7 or 8 years now. And so I've sat in a fair few of these. And what we see is defensive behaviours from both sides. And it's that thing of people not quite managing to meet in the middle. And what does that express itself as? So first, I will start on the left because I'm not here to tell you that MPs are always brilliant and easy to work with. They show defensive behaviours of their own sometimes. So for example, they will hold the party line and, only parrot out the same things again and again. That can be really frustrating, but I will talk to you about some techniques to get past it. Potentially control the conversation, not pay attention, and you might have experienced people not give you straight answers. And then, on the other side, and I'll hold my hands up here, I've done a fair amount of campaigning myself, and I have done all of these things. But things like showing irritation and really showing that in the room, it's not going to make somebody want to work with you. Deliberately exposing knowledge gap. That's a fancy way of what I call the Jeremy Paxman technique, where you make someone look stupid and show them that they don't know something. Although that makes great telly, I usually say that's something to avoid. In your meetings with someone you're trying to influence, because that makes them, not want to do something if they feel like they don't know something. What we want to do is make them feel like they do know about the topic. Again, if there's something you're trying to lobby around or influence someone, maybe don't choose the most controversial part of it at the start and build up to it, and then attacking them. Being dismissive or cynical means just palming them off. Or just not trusting what they're saying. We're trying to create this kind of feeling of trust. So yeah, I don't want to put you off at this point at all, but it's just to say, if you have experienced these things from either side, or if these would be your fears going into talking to someone with influence about climate change, know that that's okay, and these things do happen, but they can all be gotten past. And I've really seen it within a meeting, people coming in quite defensive, but using some of our techniques and trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes, making really great progress. So as I've said, I've talked a lot already about trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. The key to doing that is research and really trying to understand where they're coming from. This quote is really cheesy, but we really like it. Designing a presentation without your audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. And so by that, it really is if somebody asks me to do something and I can tell that they've understood what my role is in the thing and what I could bring to it, and it's not just a generic copy paste thing, then I'm much more likely to do it than if it's just a mass mail out to loads and loads of different people. And so our approach is all about being personal. And there's an article here which will be linked in the slides, which you can get afterwards, or you'll find it if you Google it, but from an MP, just sort of clarifying this and saying that although the mass mailing and potential petitions or 360.org and those ones where you just click a button, you get large numbers, it never has the same impact as just one person putting in the time and effort and really explaining where they're coming from. Because as people, we find it easier to relate to other people. And I hope that that's actually encouraging for you watching this, because, just as one individual, you really can make a difference if you can just put in a little bit of time and think through the person you're talking to. So if it is an MP that you want to influence, then there are loads of reasons to why MPs are really important people to influence. They do have voting power in the House of Commons, and they can make a difference of whether legislation gets passed or not. If you want to research your MP, there's a few places to do that. The first one, if you don't have lots of time and you just want to go to one place, the best place to go is theyworkforyou.com. You can put in your postcode and it'll tell you who your MP is and lots of information about them. You can also, if you're really keen, sign up to email alerts where they'll tell you when your MP has spoken in Parliament or spoken about a particular issue. It's really worth doing. The other thing is, if you're on social media, a lot of MPs use Twitter in particular to kind of tell you a bit more about themselves and their opinions. It is worth following them on there to find out a bit more about them. Their website also is a great place to find out more about them. If they don't use social media, they'll often have a blog where they'll write quite long things about, which can be really personal and help you find out about them. But yeah, I really want to stress at this point that although we are trying to find out about them as people, by going and meeting them or talking to them or writing them a letter, you will find out about them as well. And if this just sounds like your idea of hell and extra homework and pressure that you don't need, don't let this put you off. It's just some people love to do this research. Some people, they're less keen. But if you want to find out more about them, They Work For You in particular is where I would go to do it. If you don't want to do any of that, then I'm also here to tell you that at Hopes for Future, we have a research team who write these things which we call tailored lobbying strategies, which is like a 1.5 sides of A4 information about your MP, everything we think it's useful for you to know. And so if you'd rather skip the doing all the research and get us to do it for you, then I've got the details at the end of how you can get one of these, and we'd really like to help you. Obviously, here I am just talking about MPs, but you might want to influence somebody else. And if that's a councillor, again, I can maybe tell you afterwards or get in touch with me at the end about like how to do this for councillors. But just thinking about like what is a day in the life like of this person, and what are their priorities going to be, and how can I think about that? In particular, the thing that I want you, the one thing, if you're going to remember and take away from this training, the one thing that I'd like you to think about going into trying to influence anyone about anything, and I know that that's a bold claim, is this really simple scale. For any issue and any person, you can come up with where they sit on this 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is that they're completely opposed and 5 is that they're in total agreement. And so if we were talking about climate change and thinking about MPs, somebody like Caroline Lucas, who's the Green Party MP, she would definitely be a number 5, because that's her party's whole aim is tackling climate change. And she really regularly talks about it, obviously. Whereas a number 1 would be someone who is a climate change denier and regularly votes against climate change. The thing that I want you to remember is about pitching your ask to where your MP or where the person you're trying to influence is at, rather than where you are at. And by that I mean, if you're lobbying on an issue, if you're writing to someone about an issue or talking to them, you're probably at a 4 or a 5. You might well talk to other people who are 4s or 5s in your friendship group, in your campaigning group, in those sorts of places. And so then we get really used to talking about an issue, both in very obviously enthusiastic terms, but also potentially presuming quite a lot of knowledge, and also maybe in a language which reflects a certain worldview. And it's hard to get past that, don't get me wrong. And it can feel really frustrating to kind of take these steps back and talk about your issue at a level of a 1 or a 2. But what we found from time and time again is if you're a level 5 and you talk to someone who's maybe a level 2, like you're a level 5 with all of the language and the everything that goes with being a level 5, it can feel really alienating, and it highlights that gap, and it makes them think, for example, with climate change, if you're very, I want a better word, but evangelical about climate change, then that can make it seem like, oh, I have to give up all of these things that I love in my life to be a climate change warrior. Whereas if instead of talking like a 5, we can take those steps back and talk about it in a more introductory way and meet somebody where they're at, then they're more likely to kind of trust us and be able to come with us on a journey up this scale. And that's something to stress here. When I'm asking you to try and think about ways to talk about your issue at this potentially 2 level or 1 to 3 level, I'm not saying you have to stay there forever. I'm not saying dilute your passion. I'm not saying dilute the cause you're talking about. I'm just asking you to break it down into steps. And so a good example of this potentially is the conversation around plastic. And plastic is going to be a really important element of us tackling climate change. And yeah, greenhouse gas emission, but it's not the solution in and of itself. And some people who are, or would call themselves environmentalists, get really frustrated that we talk too much about plastic and that we don't talk about anything else. And I 100% hear that and understand it. But if we can connect people at that issue of plastic, and they see that in their deliveries or in their shopping there's so much plastic, and they can be part of a successful campaign potentially, or they can see that that issue is winnable and that we can make changes, then they're more likely to come with us on the next campaign beyond plastic, and join us for that journey and be a part of the force for change. Whereas if we say to them, oh, I can't believe you're still talking about plastic, then that might be really off-putting, and I think I do not want to work with these people on this issue again. So yes, that is the one thing that I would like you to remember to take away from this session, is think about where you're pitching your ask. And although it feels frustrating, try to pitch it where somebody is at and get a win under your belt and make some progress, and then take them further up the scale. The reason I've got two little arrows here between the 3 and the 4 and the 4 and the 5 is just to highlight that you won't ever be able to take someone from a 2 to a 5 in one session. We say that through one like dialogue or one meeting, you can often move someone 1 or maybe 2 places up the scale, but it does take time. And so don't be put off if after one meeting you're not all the way at the other end of the scale, because it does take a bit of time. So how do you find this issue that is going to fit on the scale perfectly and is going to be the right fit for your person? One of my colleagues, Helena, made this graph, which I really, really like, which kind of exemplifies all of that stuff I've been saying, hopefully quite clearly. As campaigners or as people who are trying to influence somebody, there are, the two axes of this graph are on the going up the side are concerned with reaching our goals. And so I think you've been talking recently about like, should meat be taken off the menus at the college? And so if that's your goal, will you you're like really, really set on that and there's no compromises to be made, you'd be going like straight up on this graph. Whereas if you are more concerned with like managing the relationship with the people who make that decision, that's the one on the bottom side. And we don't want to be too far one way or the other, because if we're too set on what we want to achieve, but we never let any, if we never make any compromises, then we'll just be at stalemate and things won't change. But if we're too concerned with the like views of the people in power, then we might also never make any progress because they might not ever take the action that we need them to take. And so we want to try and like balance these things. And the way that we try and visualize that is this really simple common ground diagram. So our agenda versus our MP's agenda, or what we want them to take action on. I don't know if I've got a case study here of an MP called Alex Chalk. He was a brand new MP in 2017, I think. Maybe it was the 2015 Parliament. And he was brand new. He wasn't particularly like a climate change campaigner. Climate change wasn't an issue on the top of his agenda. But we went to talk to him about solar energy, which was an area there was like a solar project within his constituency, which he met the people who were organising it, and you can see that on the right here with our director Sarah. And we also organised a school workshop with him about these issues and about like what positive steps the UK government could be taking to tackle climate change. And so we weren't talking about all of climate change ever, and we weren't asking huge open questions of like, what are you going to do about it? We were asking these questions about in particular solar energy in the constituency, and then building it up. And in this instance, we found that he responded really well to it. And so he gave us this nice quote, and he was actually the MP that proposed the bill that became the law, which was to get the UK government to commit to the 2050 net zero target. Another example of this might be for some MPs who aren't that ready to talk about climate change yet or the climate emergency. We will talk to them about things like flooding and air pollution, because those are issues that they can connect with for lots of other reasons. And yeah, I won't spend loads of time talking about these, but often, like in political terms, we talk about left-wing and right-wing values, and Labour politicians are traditionally left-wing, whereas Conservative is a more right-wing party. So if you were talking to a Labour MP, you might want to talk a lot about social justice and equality, or those sorts of things might go down well with them or wouldn't be alienating. Whereas, for example, talking about protest and a disrespect for authority traditionally might not go down as well with a Conservative MP. But things that would go down on the right hand would go down well are on the right hand side of this slide, such as community and national identity and those sorts of things. I'm not saying you have to like sell out your values to use these whatsoever. Like, I really don't want you to think that, but it is again trying to think through that person and their worldview. And if you can get them to connect to the issue that you care about, for example, climate change, through their own values, then that's going to be a sustainable way to get them to make change. If what you're going to ask them to do is to completely change their values to your values in order to make that step of connecting with climate change. That's a much harder thing to do and isn't really going to be achievable in any kind of timescale. And so it might feel weird working with somebody who's coming at this from a different point of view to you, but it is going to get you to that goal, which is really, really important. The other thing to say, and I meant to say this, so I'll skip back a few slides, is if you've got an MP who is at a 4 or 5 level with you, then it's another reason to be really ambitious and to make sure that you know that if they are a 4 or 5 and they're already taking good steps on this, that you can be ambitious and you can ask them to do some of those more ambitious asks. I need a better word than ambitious. Cool. So you may well have come across this at school or college, this idea of a SMART ask, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or realistic, and timely. And I've got an example here. We did a meeting with Olivia Blake MP, who's one of our local MPs in Sheffield, and she's at the kind of top left of this picture. And an example of a SMART ask for her was, will Olivia attend a meeting next week with parents of young children to discuss active travel and increasing number of and quality of cycle lanes in Sheffield? And that is actually what this meeting is. It was all about, as young parents or parents of young children, we want to get out of the car and get into our local environment and to walk and cycle around our community, but we don't always feel safe to do that. And as our MP, how will you help us? And it was a really, really brilliant event. So I've been going for half an hour. I promise that I've been doing this next little section is going to be a bit more like practical, and so you know who it is you're trying to influence, but what is it you can ask them to do? This scale is the same as that scale I showed you earlier, and it's examples of SMART asks for people at different points on that scale. I just heard a thing, and so I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Cool. Great. And so on this SMART scale, we've got something for an MP or someone in power who is potentially quite opposed to our issue, and on the other side, someone who's really signed up. I hope this will be helpful. It is a little bit technical, but if you've ever thought, oh, I should write to my MP about an issue, but I don't know what to ask them, this is like a cheat sheet for what to ask them. It gets a little bit technical about Parliament, so forgive me for that. Number 1 is about passing your letter to the relevant minister. I didn't know this until I worked at Hope for the Future, but if, for example, you wanted to write a letter to Alok Sharma, who is the president of COP26, the big climate summit that's happening in Glasgow in November, if you got out a pen and paper today and put a stamp on it and addressed it to Alok Sharma in Whitehall, he would never see that because he gets so much correspondence, but potentially you'll get a reply from somebody who works in his office. But if you drafted that letter and sent it to your MP and asked them to send it along in their Commons envelope, stamped with their Commons office and the MP's office, then Alok Sharma will definitely be made aware that the MP has passed on a letter on your issue. That's really important, obviously, because it raises the profile of that event, or of that issue. And I've never seen an MP say no to this. It's kind of like a democratic right thing that they will always pass it on. It's better if they could pass it on with a supporting letter to go with it. But even if they just pass it on, they forward it across, but with nothing other than it's in their envelope and in their stationery, then that's really brilliant. The next is written questions. These are, if you've ever seen PMQs, that's an oral question where MPs stand up in Parliament and ask out loud a question to a relevant government department. So Prime Minister's questions is that for the Prime Minister. Written questions are the equivalent. It's the MP's chance to ask questions of government departments, but there's no timetable and don't have to wait for the right day to come around. You can do it at any point. And it's really good for finding out what the government is doing on a certain issue. And so, for example, can the minister tell me how much money has been invested in active travel lanes in Sheffield? Or can the minister tell me what support the department can give to universities and colleges looking to increase their recycling capabilities? If that sounds a bit technical, then do get in touch with us at Hope for the Future, because we love helping people write these questions and working out the best way to frame them to get really good answers. The next thing, if you're MP or if the person that you're trying to engage, and this one works no matter who they are, they don't have to be an MP, is to get them like out and about, COVID compliant, of course, into the community and meeting people to talk about the issue. So a fundraising event or a walk around a wildlife park, you might want to invite the MP to the college and to meet you and, you know, see what it is that you're asking them to do. Because it brings it to life. We find this works really, really well, and so I'd really encourage that one. Number 4 is local media. That one is always worth doing. We find that MPs or people in these positions of power often, you know, respond really well to local media. And then the final one is really technical, so don't worry about it too much. But in Parliament, in the House of Commons, at the end of every day, they have these things called adjournment debates, and they last half an hour. They're not attached to legislation, so there's not a vote, but it's a chance for MPs to raise awareness about an issue, and they basically put in for a ballot to have these debates, and it's kind of luck of the draw of whether they get selected, but it is their chance to ask about an issue. So somebody who I work with at Hope's Future now used to work for an MP, and she once had to do all of his prep for him because a constituent had asked him to host an adjournment debate about how Brexit will affect student orchestras. So they can be quite niche, but if they could hold that debate, then you could probably ask your MP to hold a debate about an issue that matters to you. So I know that there's been one recently about period poverty, for example, and the supply of like sanitary products and period products in schools and colleges. So something like that you can have a debate about, and that's really brilliant for raising the profile of the issue because the government minister has to be there to respond to it. And so again, it's just that way of pushing your issue up the agenda. A Westminster Hall debate is a very similar thing. It just happens in a different room in Parliament. That's also where the petition debates happen. So if you ever signed a petition and you know it reaches 100,000 signatures, it gets a debate in Westminster Hall, which is a different room in Parliament. Okay, that was the technical bit. Cool. And again, I'm just coming back to the idea, which you'll be getting bored of hearing me say now, about like trying to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and understand how we can get them to be passionate about this issue and be excited about this issue from where they're coming from. And so we want to think about framing and how do we frame this issue in a way that makes sense for them. And so, for example, I always like to use the example of baking. If you wanted to teach somebody how to make a cake, you would probably sell that to them by talking about this delicious cake that they're going to get to eat at the end, rather than all the really difficult parts of making a cake, like you have to buy the ingredients, you have to find a recipe, spend time making it, it might go wrong. Like those are not the things that you would use to sell someone cake making. You'd sell them the really delicious cake that they're going to get at the end. And that's what we want to think about for climate change. What is the vision that we're selling, and how can we connect that to this person and their local area? So here you can see Guto Beb MP, who's an MP in Wales, and we talked to him about the local area and about issues that really like connected him with his constituents, wildlife and that sort of thing in his area, which was a way to have that conversation that he could engage with. And yeah, again, thinking about ways to motivate people, you're giving them more knowledge and understanding about the issue, which is really important. When you're an MP and you have to know everything about everything, that constituency mandate and winning votes is always going to go down well. Publicity will always go down well. This idea of like leaving a legacy of public service and making a name for yourself for a good reason is not always something that politicians get, and so that's something that we want to offer them. And then again, co-benefits of taking climate action, selling the positive reasons for doing something. So if we install more cycle lanes, then air pollution will go down, but also people will be out in the environment more. It might make people healthier, those sorts of things. What are the positives of what you're trying to sell? It's always worth including those. Now, that was a lot of information. This is where it gets really practical, and these are tips for if you're in the room having a conversation with someone, or if you're writing a letter or an email, how to phrase it in a way that people are going to kind of hopefully want to say yes to what it is you're asking them to do. And you've been getting this vibe, I hope, from me for this last few minutes of building that sense of trust and putting yourself in their shoes. And so I don't know if you've ever heard about this fight or flight or freeze reflex, but basically when we feel scared, we tense up and it doesn't make us want to work with someone. If someone told me all of the reasons why climate change is really scary and the world's going to end in 10 years time, that would probably really scare me. And for some people that would make them think, okay, I need to act now, and for others they'll think I need to bury my head in the sand. Whereas if someone came to me and said, climate change is a really important issue, the thing that I think that we could be doing right now to tackle it, which is 100% doable, is this, will you help me? I'm really going to be keen to help. So it is those feelings of safety, well-being, and trust. So getting really practical and some kind of techniques that I'd love you to try using in your emails or in your meetings when you're trying to influence someone. This first one is, I call it the elevator pitch, but for your conversation. So this is going to be the first thing you say if you're meeting with someone or the first line of your email. It's what what they're in for, what they can expect from that email or that conversation. We've probably all received emails and it's like you're 5 paragraphs in and you don't really know what that person's asking you to do yet, whereas we want to be really clear right at the start what it is that we want to achieve. So I'd like to discuss the issue of air quality in our local area. That's the purpose why you're there. The hook is why they should care about it. I'm concerned that poor air quality in this area increases the risk of COVID-19, or that it's really damaging for the lungs of the children in our area. Why they should care. And then the map is more specifically what you'd like to cover or what you'd like them to do. I'd like to discuss your commitment to promoting clean energy and supporting the phase out of petrol and diesel cars. I would like to discuss how the college can change its menus to reflect the conversation we've been having about meat-free meals, being really specific about that. And then you can go into more detail later in your email or in your meeting. This one, I know it sounds like cheesy, but it is really worth thinking about and practicing and making sure that you can set yourself up on the right tone and on the right on the right way so that the rest of that conversation can go really smoothly. The next one is about building rapport. And this is especially helpful if you're meeting somebody new or potentially like you don't know where they stand on the issue yet. And so, for example, while I was at university, I was doing some campaigning around divestment, which is taking the university's investments in fossil fuels and putting them instead into renewable sources, potentially. And so sometimes we were in rooms with different people, different academics or different executives each time, and we weren't sure where they stood on the issue. So if they say something like generic, like, of course, climate change is really important to us, and we think this is vital, you can say something like, I see what you're saying. I'm really glad to hear you think it's important. Do you think that you could clarify that by committing to this? Do you think you could go a step further to say that you would agree that we should take our investments out by 2022? And trying to gently push somebody, but not alienate them so that they can, again, as I say, like come with you on this journey. And another thing is just about finding out where they are at. So to check we're on the same page, would I be right in thinking that you would go as far as to support this, or you like the idea of it, but your hesitation is around this part, or you would need some more convincing on this issue in order to get us to the next step, and like making it clear to them that they are allowed to say that they're concerned, because you're going to need to find out those concerns in order to make progress. We can't just, as much as we want to, we can't just steamroll them. It's not like we can just give this great monologue like we're in a film and then they'll be convinced. There is going to be a bit of back and forth, but it's really, really worth it, because just a little bit of back and forth and them learning that you're a safe person. I've been in the room and I've seen it like over and over again. They start to like break down those barriers and really connect to the issue and like want to help us, which is obviously at the end of the day what we want. And then again, this is just like a more practical one, but making sure that you are clarifying and solidifying. So I'm getting a clear sense of 3 priorities going forward, and just making sure that you're on the same page as you go through. And again, another like quite practical one, assuring is I can see how this might be a risk. However, you know, I've got friends and family who thought that way, and I took them to see this wildlife area, and you know, then they really understood. Or it might seem like a risk, however, I think the bigger risk is not doing something. It might seem like a risk for this reason, and I totally understand that. However, my counter argument would be that we just need to take the step if we are going to reach our net zero target. Not being afraid to be assertive is my next one. So I know your time is limited, so can we return to? You may not ever need to say this, and it might not be something you ever face, but especially like as a young person trying to campaign on these issues, sometimes it can feel like you can't talk over someone, or you know, you might get talked at a little bit. And so using phrases like this, like, I know your time is limited, so can we get back to? At the beginning I did mention I wanted to cover 3 things, and I think we're kind of stalling on this one, so can we go to the next one? Those kind of techniques will help your conversations progress. This last one, adapting, is just sometimes they might throw an idea at you, which is like a safe zone for them and a way that they would feel comfortable to take action. And it might not be as part of your original plan, but as much as possible, I think it's great to be able to say yes to things and to like take that enthusiasm where you can find it and build from it rather than shut somebody down. And so if they said, we can't commit to this every day, but we could commit to meat-free Mondays, you know, you say, yes, that would be a great starting point, and then we can evaluate again in a few weeks. So just knowing when to adapt if you can. Okay, so I'm throwing a lot at you, and I'm very nearly done. I am leaving a bit of time at the end for questions. And also, yeah, if you've got any questions for me about, you know, having these sorts of conversations, working with MPs, or like working in the climate sector or anything like that, I'd be really keen to hear them. But yes, this kind of, these last few slides, this one is about, in a maybe like a half an hour conversation, what would we like to achieve, and how would we want that conversation to progress? So this is summarizing what I've said so far. By introducing ourselves with that purpose hook and map, everybody in the room knows what we're there to achieve and why we're asking for half an hour of their time. And so that's really important. The listening stage is that thing of fact finding and really trying to understand them and where they are as a person. And so I talked earlier about research, and that's really important, but the best kind of research is being in the room, because somebody might be a 4 on paper, but actually when you start asking the questions, they end up being more of a 2. And that isn't a bad thing. Finding that out is so important and useful, because then you know where you stand and you can find out the next step for them. And yeah, seeing, sensing, and letting go. It might be that you have to scale down your ambition a bit, or maybe lengthen your timeline, but that's all really great information as part of your campaign. And then the visioning stage is using that information of, okay, they did seem a bit hesitant about introducing this in our original timeline, but they did offer this as a solution. How can we progress that? So trialing things like, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying there. Do you think then that the decision that we'll go with is to do this by this date? And seeing if, you know, if they respond well to that. Crystallizing, which is a bit of a funny way of putting it, but just like nailing down what it is that you actually want to take forward, and concluding. This final one is super simple, but so easily forgotten, which is to do that following up. If you've had a meeting with somebody and you made some agreements, make sure you send that follow-up email that says, thank you for your time for a really productive meeting. On your side, you agreed to whatever it might be, and on our side, we'll do something else. I would really encourage you to try and think about this framing of like, we're asking you to do something, but we're still doing something in return. Like, we're not putting it all on you, because then it just makes that relationship feel more balanced. And yeah, as I say, to get it down in writing, because I know that if it's not in writing, it's not in my to-do list. And if it's not in my to-do list, like, it's not going to happen. So getting that written down and in their inbox, and then is there a date next month for us to meet again, just to kind of keep the ball rolling on that. So yeah, I'm pretty much finished there. I am going to stop sharing my screen. I need to find the screen where everyone is again. There we go. And yeah, I guess I'll just summarize that of, yeah, we're trying to get people to think about how to understand where that other person is coming from and frame their asks in that way. Some of it was a little bit technical about Parliament stuff. Any of the technical stuff, please do get in touch with me, because we have a team of people who love the like Parliament technical stuff. And yeah, just some things to go away and think about.